Yes. This one. This one. Yes. Can you hear? Hello? Hello? Do you hear me? They told us today the sound is very good. Noise? I don't have any noise here. Off, yes. Yes, yes, they are off, they are off. Yes, 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 they are off. Off. Yes, yes. Not. 3, 2. Mercedes, I switch. Okay, let's start the next session in the Congress, International Congress, Connecting Schools. And this is the round table. We are going to talk about the keys, about inclusion in the classroom. So please, Paul Ortega, thank you to be here.
Thank you very much. In the name of the Basque government, the Basque Agency for International Development Cooperation, we are very happy to share with all of you a lot of sounds, knowledge, experiences, practices about inclusive education. We are in development cooperation, but we work a lot in education for social transformation. I think it's really a pleasure. It's really very good to have 3 excellent experts. I am going to go directly to introduce themselves. As you know, the main goal of these roundtables, Keys for Inclusion in the Classroom, is to share visions and knowledge around the keys that favor inclusion in the classroom as a way to contribute for social transformation. So here we have, first of all, Kiki Messiou. She is professor within Southampton Education School at the University of Southampton. Thank you very much for coming here. Welcome. As well, we have, not exactly here, but at the virtual level, our friend Jaime Sarmiento. He's project manager of ITC and inclusion in Fe y Alegría, Ecuador. Hello, Jaime.
Hello, thank you very much.
We have here with us as well AnaLu López Velez. She's a lecturer and researcher at the Department of Didactic and School Organization in the Faculty of Education and Sports at the University of the Basque Country. A real pleasure as well to have here AnaLu. So, yeah. Jaime Sarmiento from Ecuador.
Hello, thank you very much.
Jaime, hello.
Yes, hello, thank you very much. I am here. Can you hear me?
Okay. At the meantime, if you want, I can say something about and as well to give the word to Professor Kiki Messiou. As I told you, she's coming from the University of Southampton. She joined at the University of Southampton in October 2012. Her research interests are in the area of inclusive education, and in particular, in exploring children's and young people's voices to understand notion of marginalization and develop inclusive practices in schools. Well, she has an impressive bio and curriculum vitae, and as well experience as primary school teacher. So si algo already connect the gradual level of the students and children. Okay, again.
Hello, thank you very
Jaime,
much.
can you say something, please?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm glad to share
Not yet.
this roundtable with you.
Wait, we are solving this problem. Not the
Okay,
problem.
I can hear you perfectly, and I'm following you with this introduction. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me now. I'm following you with this introduction.
Come in, come in. Jaime
Hello again. Hello again. Can you hear me now?
Alegría in Ecuador.
Is working for Agencia in Ecuador. And as well, we have a lot of experience in development of specialization projects, as well.
Right. We are looking forward to Jaime in this round table. Jaime, please.
Yes, I can hear you. I'm following you.
Okay, Jaime, wonderful. Yeah, it was.
Thank you.
Okay, Jaime, it's okay, everything?
Yes, I'm okay here. I'm following you with this introduction, and I'm ready to start. Thank you very much.
Excellent. As I told you, we have 3 participants in this round table. Professor Kiki, Messiou, you, Jaime Sarmiento, from Alegría, Ecuador, and as well AnaLu López Velez, who is at the University of the Basque Country. So because it's going to be a little bit late, we are going to start by one. Jaime, first we have 4 discussion issues. So we are going to start with Kiki, after that you, Jaime, and AnaLu, and you are going to try to answer those 4 discussion issues. So we are going to start with the first one, Kiki. So you can say with us what conditions should be the context present, proof inclusion in the classroom. Coming up, what will be the 2 key ideas to start with something? Thank you.
Hello from me as well. So 2 key ideas to start for inclusion in the classroom. We are talking about, I think it's important to first just briefly say what inclusion is about in terms of there are different definitions in the literature. So I'm focusing on inclusion as an ongoing process which aims at allowing all children to participate and achieve in the classroom. So taking this as a definition, for me, the two key ideas that need to be present in order to have inclusive classrooms is first that teachers need to believe that inclusion is possible. I remember back in the 1990s, two American authors, Steinbach and Steinbach, were referring to many practitioners as well as academics that were asking questions like, can a disabled child be included in class? Why should a child who doesn't speak the language of the country disrupt the learning of the others? And the argument they were putting forward was that these are all wrong questions. So the only question we should be asking when we're talking about inclusion is the idea, how can we make classrooms inclusive for all children? So for me, that's the key message, that that's the only question we should be asking. Despite challenges, if we believe that inclusion is the right of all children, then we should be trying and finding the ways. So key in teachers believing in inclusion. And that means children believing that all children can achieve in schools and moving away from deficit ways of thinking that the child cannot do this, the child cannot do the other. And the question should be, how can we change the learning environment, the interactions, in order to help all children participate in the classroom? So for me, these are the two key interconnected ideas.
Great, thank you very much. So, Jaime Sarmiento from Fe y Alegría, Ecuador, please, could you share with us as well your opinion, the conditions to improve inclusion in the classroom, please?
Okay, thank you. First, I want to share that Fe y Alegría in Ecuador has the opportunity to understand the situation of a great diversity of families and students, because we work in all levels with all kind of population and all kind of exclusion situations at the same time. So the context is a key factor for our educational proposal. And Fe y Alegría has also a specific experience in people with disabilities, and this relevant experience help us to understand three keys that can be highlighted to improve inclusion in the classroom and can help people without disabilities. The first key is about that schools should not wait for a student to start education late. 8 years, 10 years, 16 years is a situation. Students starting education at late is a very common situation in Ecuador, and in Latin America. So the school must be articulated with other services, or even also create services for the detection and early education of children at the risk of exclusion or with disabilities, especially with disabilities. The second key has to do with not allowing families to come to school confused or paralyzed by a clinical or medical approach about disability, and organize them to create a partnership between families and the school to move towards understanding and implementing a social and human rights perspective about disability or about the exclusion situation of their children. And the third key has to do with the creation of a transition systems that facilitate the change of the organizational culture. Because in some countries, the inclusive model creates a imposition from the authorities, and schools are they are not opened with this kind of administrative decisions. So we don't start creating the culture, we start with an obligation. Sometimes awareness, training, association of people with disabilities working with organization of families of people with disabilities, can be a transitional system to help the school, and that be very useful for the entire educational community to see educational inclusion as a goal, as a process ongoing, as Kiki said, in that we are working, but not as an imposition that must be initiated and achieved in short term. That happens when the administrative decision creates inclusion as an imposition. So the student is access to education, and then the idea of inclusion is becomes a barrier in the cultural situation of education. Transition must be seen as a mechanism to build together in a sustained process the inclusive school that we want.
Okay, thank you very much, Jaime. And now with AnaLu López Velez from the University of Vasca. Please, AnaLu.
Thank you, Paul. The most important aspect that I think we need to take into consideration when we want to promote inclusion practices are linked with two tensions. The first tension is social perspective model versus a medical model, a clinical model. If we think that the child is the one who has the problem, and if we think that we need to fix the child, we won't be able to make an inclusive practice. But if we think that this particular child, or a group of children have problems, have barriers in the interaction with the context, we will be able to see how can we improve the way they can participate, the way they can be in class, the way that they are going to learn, and the way they are going to achieve. So this is one of the main tensions that we have at the moment in our educational systems. On the other hand, there's another tension there, which is linked to the idea of student-centered learning or teachers-centered learning. If we are thinking about the children, we need to consider that we have to guarantee the rights to education. We also need to consider their individual needs and also their characteristics in order to be able to respond to their needs. We also need to promote active and interactive learning in class so that they are going to be able to work with each other and to learn from each other. We also need to have a personalized support so we can see what are their interests, what are their motivations, and link the practice in class and the learning with these motivations and interests. And finally, but I think one of the most important things is evaluation. If evaluation is only considering comparisons between children, among children, we won't be able to achieve inclusion because we will be doing very innovative practice, but at the end of the day, they will be being assessed in a more traditional way. If we want to consider an inclusive evaluation, we have to take into consideration the process of each one of the children, considering from the starting point what they have achieved in each part of the learning process.
Thank you very much, AnaLu. We are going to be brief with the second question, with the second discussion. So, be brief. What kind of skills develop?
Okay, I'm going to just refer to one key strategy which relates to my own research, which is the idea of listening to students' voices, engaging with children's voices to understand the context that we work in. So this is a distinctive approach in research where practitioners, researchers try to find out what children think about schools. So sometimes, despite what the teachers are doing in classrooms with the best intentions to support children, these are not perceived as helpful by students, and the children themselves, the students, young people, can give us a different perspective. So for me, this is a very powerful strategy for making sure that what we offer in schools is inclusive according to how the children perceive that. So I'm just going to stay with this one strategy.
Thank you very much. Jaime Sarmiento from Frei Alegría, Ecuador. Please, as well, very brief. What kind of strategies we will develop using inclusion in the classroom?
Okay, we call these strategies key options based on what we develop in our inclusion team, particularly the contributions of our teacher, Juan Carlos Jimenez. The first option is the approach for an education for diversity based on human rights. The inclusion approach displaces the integrating model and makes us rethink the so-called and applied curricular adaptations that is very common in our Latin American education and regular system. Education orientation to diversity is conceived as the set of educational action that, in a broad sense, try to prevent and respond temporary or permanent needs of every student. The second strategy is that we opt for the universal design for learning developed by the Center for Applied Special Technology, CAST. The proposal of the CAST is to have a flexible curriculum, improve multiple means and materials for education, and take advantage of the interest and motivation of the students so everyone can access learning. The third strategy is the functional ecological approach, which is a curricular approach that best responds to the needs of the students with functional diversity, especially for students with multiple disability. And we have realized that is very useful in our schools that attend this population. Fourth key option is inclusion in the educational system from an early age in the case of people with disabilities especially. We have verified that is the best strategy that help us to achieve equal opportunities and accompany families in their visualization of disability, leaving behind this medical approach and to help this to discover the future alternatives for the children. The first years is very difficult to the families, especially when the clinical speech is inside of the visualization of disability of the children. Faced with the late schooling, typical of the population with disabilities in Ecuador and Latin America, attention for early childhood development has proven to be decisive along with accompanying families. The next strategy is that we opt for the inclusion in an educational transition, as said, for cultural change and during the students' development process. That then we respect and we conceive the realms and periods of change in students. The transition system is necessary in many contexts in which the schools needs to pilot and prepare itself to make major changes in the organizational culture and attitudinal barriers.
Okay. Thank you, Jaime. We have more questions, so we need to go faster. So we are going to give now the opportunity to AnaLu López Velez to develop this point, please.
Okay. From my point of view, I think there are two aspects that are really important when we are talking about the classroom. Kiki has talked about the children, which are the main actors of this of the practicing class, but we also need to take into consideration the teachers. They need to have the knowledge, the empathy, the attitudes, and the commitment to be able to respond better to the needs of their children. For that, they need to reflect. They need to be reflective practitioners who think about their practices, think about the things they need to change, think about the barriers the children are facing, and the way they could minimize and reduce these barriers. In order to be able to do this, the support needs to be different, because teachers need support to be able to make different practices in class. The support is not only for children, and sometimes we think that the support is going to be only for supporting an individualized response to children. But if we want to have an inclusive practice and inclusive classroom, we need to take into consideration that the support assistant and the support professionals need to work hand by hand with the teachers. They need to advise the teachers of how to do things. They need to model, to be a model for the teachers in order to respond better to the students. They also need to make the bridge with the families, because they can be the mentors and help the families going through the transition from one level to the next one. And also they need to coordinate this support with the community in order to be able to plan in a different way, to organize the classes considering the universal design for learning and also the cognitive accessibility for children. They also need to promote interactive and cooperative learning together. They need to make an inclusive evaluation system. And finally, they need to link together the support and the teacher with the community.
Thank you very much. Now the third question. So, what are the most common developments?
For me, this relates to um, the ideas that we started off with in terms of the way of thinking, primarily by the teachers and senior leaders in the school. So if there are narrow ways of thinking about children's abilities, then this is the main barrier. If the thinking is that any child can do well in some way, provided that they are given the support and are given different ways of accessing material, then that's the other way of thinking about how to ensure that we can make learning accessible for all. But if the starting point is that the child cannot achieve this child is struggling with reading, with writing, then this is the biggest barrier that we need to address in order to be more creative and more inventive in the way that we organize learning in the classrooms. And at the same time, I would say non-supportive environments. Inclusion is a very challenging process. Teachers, children need support. They need support from senior leaders in the school. So when they don't have that support, because it's such a challenging process, this might be very difficult for them and can be a big barrier. So the teachers operate within the biggest national context, but at the end of the day, the children arrive, they are there in front of them, they have the power of making changes. So for me, the biggest barrier is their own way of thinking about what children can do and what the teachers can do in order to help them to access learning.
Thank you very much. Jaime, Sarmiento, very brief career.
Okay, the first barrier is a linear school model that is not designed to address diversity, or typical school has been designed to meet a student profile that is conceived as homogeneous raw material, enters with specific knowledge, skills, and competencies, is subject to the teaching learning process in which we incorporate to that student a series of knowledge that is new to him, and the finished product is a student who we evaluate if she or he masters the knowledge we have imparted to him or her. So this linear school model difficults the inclusion, especially when a student enters without knowing a language. He cannot speak, cannot see, cannot mobilize, cannot complete the task. So we blame the student. We have to do a curricular adaptation, or we put him or her in a corner to continue working with the students who are more or less adapted to our linear model. That is the first barrier. The second barrier is attitudinal barriers that, combined with bureaucratic or administrative barriers, create inflexible procedures and demands that limit opportunities for those students who do not follow a standard student model that fits that linear school model. And the, the third the third barrier is that we used to deposit all the responsibility and in some case the culpability of inclusion in teachers. Teachers, of course, are very important, but in some cases there are a protection system that creates a huge barriers. What happens, for example, when a student cannot speak, when a student starts the education very late, um, depositing responsibility in the teacher is unfair when the conditions of social exclusion, social injustice have limited and condemned the opportunities of many students. And I think in Latin America, something that we must to achieve early in the lives of children to create better systems of inclusion.
Okay, thank you very much. AnaLu López Velez, please.
Okay, well, I'm going to take into consideration the last report made by the Committee of United Nations on the Rights of the People with Disabilities in Spain, considering the sixth article of the facultative protocol of the convention. This was published in 1918, and they underlined some of the aspects that needed to be into consideration in the educational system of Spain. They consider that there's a discriminatory structural pattern in the educational system based on the medical model that we were talking about earlier on. Considering this pattern, the human rights of those children with disabilities are not guaranteed in the school because they have a lack of access to some of the levels of the educational system. Particularly when we are getting through the primary education system and then we go to the secondary system. They also pointed out that there is a lack of clarity among the authorities about how to deal with inclusion and how to deal with the quality and equity of education. And they think that this is a very dramatical situation because this is really important in the lives of those children with disabilities who won't be able to have an independent and autonomous life. And also it is jeopardizing the families, the life of the families. They say that it is very serious, the situation, and it is systematic. It is a systematic problem, and we need to deal with it, considering internal and external examinations, and also making plans in order to have a proper inclusive education view, practice, and politics in our country.
Thank you.
Thank
Let's
you.
go with the last discussion. So, talk about good practice. What are the practices?
Just there are lots of good examples of good practices in schools in the field of inclusive education, and I'm not going to be referring to specific schools or specific projects, even though I have lots of examples. But in my view, and based on the work that I've carried out over the years, the best examples are the ones where you see collaborative approaches being employed within schools as a common way of working. And I'm talking about collaborative approaches, teachers collaborating with teachers, teachers collaborating with children, students, child, student collaboration, and also involving other members within the school or even outside the school, like the families or community. And many times when people refer to collaborative ways of working in schools, they might refer to about cooperative learning being used in lessons, which is a very inclusive approach. But I'm referring to much broader ways of collaboration. And I always say that it's very important that the teachers who are key actors within the classroom, that they are role models for what is happening in the school. So they cannot really expect collaboration among students if they don't collaborate between them. So they have to demonstrate these ways of working about schools in order to find ways to solve problems that might be there, as well as developing learning and teaching. And we've used a number of collaborative approaches in our own work in projects. And this morning I've referred a bit to one project that I'm leading at the moment, which involves 5 European countries: Austria, Denmark, England, Portugal, and Spain, and where we work collaboratively with teachers and children in order to reach out to all children in schools, particularly those that are seen as hard to reach. So the project is Reaching the Hard to Reach, and it's funded by the European Union. So if people just Google reachingthehardtoreach.eu, they will have a look at materials that we provided. And this is just a specific example, but there are others there.
Thank you very much. Please, Jaime Sarmiento, you share with us about good practice for point of opinion.
In the case of FAILRI Ecuador, we have received 3 awards for our good practice in inclusion, granted by some international organization. And the key of our first good practice is the recognition that the detection and early attention of children is very, very important. Thanks to this, to our model, we have achieved the inclusion of more than 250 students with disabilities from the initial education. I mean, from 2, 3, 4, or 5 years in ordinary education. The second recognition has to do with has to do with working with families. We have this model that is called Diálogo de Saberes, that we consider, and where we consider that the families have very valuable knowledge about the development of their children, and that knowledge could be useful to the school and other families. Therefore, spaces for dialogue between families must be created to take advantage of this knowledge to empower families and to improve the relationship between school and family. And the third recognition is about the good practices that has to do with develop skills for the transition to adult life, to higher education, or to work according to vocational orientation. And finally, I must to highlight the systematization work that we have done to document and organize our learning. I think organized learning, systematization, and creating knowledge, sharing knowledge is a very good practice to improve the inclusion in our country, or in Latin America, or wherever exclusion situations exist.
Okay. Well, I think some of the schools of the state has been used. They have been using the index for inclusion as a way of analyzing the barriers to learning, access, and participation and achievement. And I think they have been doing a great effort to make steps towards inclusion. Also, because as Kiki has said, they are introducing the voices of the children. They are visualizing the voices of the children, who are the main actors and who are the ones who can give us some clues about how to do and how to improve in our schools. There are also different movements in schools that are making interactions between the community and the school, promoting dialogic learning and interactive learning. This is the case of the learning communities, where students dream about the school they want, and they start making plans to put it in practice, and also families take part in these decisions. Also, there are some schools who are using service learning program approaches in order to promote another way of learning by making children make their own programs, planning their own projects, and then making this project in the community, giving some service to the community. And also, if we talk about the educational system of the Basque Country, nowadays we have the new plan, the Plan Marco para el Desarrollo de una Escuela Inclusiva, the action plan for the development of an inclusive school from 2019 to 2022, where they have analyzed the situation of the Basque Country, and they have decided to put in place some programs. For example, they have a program called Bizikasi program, where the schools are linked to analyze the situation of the schools in order to improve the climate and avoid abusive behaviors in the school, harassment in the school. We also have, they are also promoting, the Basque government, they are also promoting the networks between schools and among schools in order to learn from the experience of other schools. For example, this is the case of Partekatu's Ikasi program. And they are also promoting networks of different services in order to have a more integral response to the students. For example, Osatus program, where they link the schools with the health services, with the social services, so that they can work together and to give a proper response to the children and to the families. That's it.
Thank you very much. I think we have, unfortunately, we have analyzed I think all of us, we believe in, but we really appreciate very acknowledgement about inclusion in the classroom, and for that, thank you very much to show us, to help us to think that to make inclusion is possible in the classroom and to learn a lot from your experience and acknowledgement. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, the program is running, so thanks again.